The moment my son's fiancée called me the help, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for years. I was no longer a part of his life. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day where my son Liam would take the next big step in his life. But as I stood there in the middle of his wedding reception, I felt something I had never expected, an overwhelming sense of being invisible. The moment hit me like a sharp sting right in front of everyone. Ava, Liam's fiancée, turned to the server, her voice loud enough for every table nearby to hear, "The help eats in the kitchen." She didn't even glance my way. Her eyes flicked right past me, through me, as if I were nothing more than a piece of furniture in the background. It was clear I was no longer seen as his mother, as a valued part of his life, but just a mere presence, unimportant and disposable. The air seemed to freeze around me, and for a brief moment my breath caught in my throat. I knew then that I wasn't just a bystander at this wedding, I was being erased. As I looked around, the signs of disrespect kept piling up. My name card, the one that should have read Mother of the Groom, was simply printed with Clara Harlow. No honor, no recognition of my role in bringing Liam into the world and raising him. Even my seat so far back I could barely see the stage was a clear message. Meanwhile, Ava's spin instructor had the privilege of sitting in the front row, and my favorite champagne gone, replaced by Ava's choice, a sustainable rosé, one I had never even heard of. It was small, petty things, but they were so clearly deliberate. It felt like a calculated effort to make me feel small. What stung the most, though, was Liam, the boy I had carried through so many storms, from heartbreak to financial ruin. He stood there adjusting his cufflinks, chatting away with Ava's cousin about hedge funds, as if nothing was wrong. He didn't notice. He didn't care. In that moment, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was just the background noise to their perfect day. I felt my chest tighten, but I wasn't going to let it break me. Not today, not in front of them. As the wedding reception continued, the tension in my chest only grew. The sting of Ava's words echoed in my mind louder than the laughter and chatter around me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a moment, a misstep, a slip. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just one comment. It was the culmination of years of small slights and growing distance between me and my son. I had dedicated my life to building Harlow Interiors, from nothing, pouring my heart, soul, and years of sacrifice into every design, every client, every project. Liam had been my everything. I had taught him the business, worked side by side with him, and watched him grow into a man who, for a long time, I believed understood what it meant to build something meaningful. But today, as I stood in the background of his wedding, I realized the truth: I was no longer part of that equation. The signs had been there for years, small enough that I could brush them off at first. The late-night phone calls where I was no longer needed to make decisions. The design projects that I had once led, but now found myself excluded from. And even the business meetings where I became little more than a figurehead, a name to lend credibility to Liam's vision, but never the partner I once was. Slowly, over time, my role in the family business had been minimized, my importance slowly erased, and now it was clearer than ever at his wedding. With his fiancée standing proudly by his side, Liam had fully shifted his loyalty. I was no longer his mother nor his partner. I was just an asset, something to be used when necessary and then discarded when I no longer fit their plan. As I sat there watching Liam laugh with Ava's cousin, oblivious to the growing storm inside me, I heard the clinking of glasses and the soft murmurs of the crowd as the toast began. I couldn't help but notice the way everyone's eyes shifted to Liam as he stood smiling with the microphone in his hand. For a moment, I felt the sharp sting of isolation. Once again, how could I be here in the same room, surrounded by people, yet feel more alone than ever? Liam tapped his glass, and the crowd fell silent. The energy in the room shifted, but not in the way it should have. He began to speak, his voice clear and confident as he addressed the guests. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," he said, his smile wide, almost rehearsed, "especially my mother, Clara, who helped make today possible." And just like that, the words that should have been filled with warmth and gratitude came out empty. Helped, he said past tense. A chill ran through me. Past tense. The boy I had carried through every storm from grief to financial ruin was now introducing me as a relic of the past. To him, my contributions were no longer relevant. In that moment, I felt invisible, as if I had never mattered to him beyond what I could provide. I stayed seated, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The room fell silent, as if waiting for something, but it wasn't applause they were expecting. It was the acknowledgement of my presence that had vanished. The awkwardness in the air was palpable. Even the string quartet seemed to falter. And yet Liam, oblivious to the gravity of his words, continued as if nothing had changed. He moved on, but I couldn't. I felt the sting of his betrayal like a sharp needle, each word a reminder of how little I had become in his eyes. I had given him everything: my love, my hard work, my identity, and in return, I had become a mere footnote in his life. As the toast continued, I stood up, my body moving almost of its own accord. I stepped out of the reception hall, away from the noise, the laughter, the well-wishes. The cool night air hit me as I walked into the garden, where the lavender bushes swayed gently in the breeze. I didn't even realize where I was going until I found myself standing behind the trellis wall, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't just about the slight, the disrespect, or the careless words that had been said. It was about the years of giving and receiving nothing in return. It was about the fact that my son, the one I had built this life for, had taken everything I had given him: my love, my business, my name, and thrown it all aside as if it were nothing more than a transaction. I reached into my clutch, pulling out my phone with hands that were steady, even though my heart was not. With a calm I didn't even know I had left in me, I dialed Victor. Cancel the $30 million contract Liam was supposed to announce tonight, I said, my voice even controlled like a surgeon making a clean incision. There was a moment of silence on the other end, but I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need his sympathy. Maggie, you heard me? I continued. It was mine to give, and now it's mine to keep. Victor didn't ask why. He never did. That was why I trusted him. I'll notify the board immediately, he said, and I hung up. As I stood there looking at the wilting roses in the moonlight, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I had stepped away from the chaos, taken back what was mine, and in doing so I had reclaimed my power. No one could erase my legacy, not Liam, not Ava, not anyone. As I stood there, the cool breeze brushing past me, I found myself lost in thought. The sound of the string quartet still faintly echoed from the reception, but my mind had already drifted far away, back to a time when life was simpler, when Liam was just a little boy, and the world seemed full of possibilities. I remembered when I was 27, a newly divorced woman with a toddler and a mountain of debt. I had nothing but my determination and the desire to build something meaningful, something that would give Liam a better life than the one I had left behind. My heart ached just thinking about those early days, how I would work late into the night sketching designs, meeting clients, and doing everything in my power to get Harlow Interiors off the ground. I was determined, and despite the challenges, the long nights, and the exhaustion, I built it from scratch. Liam had always been by my side. As I worked, he'd sit on the floor beside me, playing with his toys, oblivious to the struggles that I was facing. I often think back to those moments, how he'd toddle around my office, touching the fabric swatches, and calling my portfolio Mommy's secret suitcase. He was my motivation, my reason for pushing forward when everything else seemed to be falling apart. The sacrifices I made were always for him, for the future we could have together. Harlow Interiors wasn't just a business, it was my lifeline. It was my proof that I could create something of value, something that would stand the test of time. And it did. The company grew, gaining recognition and respect in the interior design world. Clients trusted me, admired my work, and soon I was known not just as a mother, but as a successful businesswoman, one who had built something from the ground up. But as the years passed, I began to notice a subtle shift in Liam. It was small at first, easy to ignore, but then it became undeniable. As Harlow Interiors grew, so did Liam. He went off to college, started his MBA, and eventually returned to the company. But something had changed, where once he had looked up to me as a partner, someone who had taught him everything he knew, he started to look at me differently. At first, I brushed it off. It's just growing pains, I told myself. He's becoming a man. He's becoming independent. But the changes were more than just him spreading his wings. He started referring to me by my first name, Clara, in public, something that had never happened before. He used to call me Mom or even Mommy as any son would. But now when we were at business meetings in front of clients, he introduced me as Clara Harlow, founder of Harlow Interiors. No mom, no acknowledgement of the woman who had raised him, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the life he had now. The first time he did it, I thought it was a mistake, a slip of the tongue, but it kept happening. He referred to me as Clara more and more, and each time it stung a little more. I wondered if he even saw me as his mother anymore, or if I had simply become another tool in his business, a name, a face, to add to the company's image. I'll never forget the charity gala. I had worked tirelessly, designing a space for the event, arranging the decor, making sure everything was perfect. Liam was the star of the night, and as he stood to give his speech, he introduced me without a second thought, Clara Harlow, founder of Harlow Interiors. That was all. No mention of our history of the years I had spent building this company, raising him alone, and sacrificing my dreams to ensure his future. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to blur. I smiled, of course, as any mother would. But inside, I felt a sharp, searing pain, a recognition that the relationship we once shared was no longer the same. He had rebranded me. I wasn't his mother anymore. I wasn't even a partner in the business. I was a name, a legacy, something to be used when it suited him and discarded when it didn't. And now, standing there in the garden, the weight of that realization was unbearable. I had poured everything I had into building Harlow Interiors. I had given Liam everything, my time, my energy, my love, and this was what it had come to. It was no longer about family. It wasn't about the love or the bond we shared. It was about business. It was about what I could offer, and when I could no longer offer anything of value, I was no longer needed. But as the breeze stirred the lavender, and the reality of the wedding day continued to unfold without me, I realized something deep inside. I had given so much for him, for this business, and for this family, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to give to myself. And in that moment, standing there alone, I decided it was time to take back what was mine. It was time to stop being the background to their story. It was time to step into my own light. As the days passed after the wedding, a lingering feeling of unease settled deeper inside me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that the whole day had just been a misunderstanding, a misstep, or a product of the stress surrounding Liam and Ava's big day. But deep down, I knew that what had happened was not an isolated incident. It was part of a much bigger pattern, one that had been slowly unraveling for years. I began to notice the subtle ways my role in both the business and the family had been eroded, chipped away, bit by bit, like a sculpture slowly being worn down by an unseen hand. It started with small things I could have ignored if I hadn't been paying attention. But I had been paying attention. For years, I had poured my heart into Harlow Interiors, and now the very thing I had built seemed to be slipping away from me. One of the first signs came when Ava hired a younger designer to join the company, someone with little experience but plenty of ambition. At first, I thought it was a strategic move to bring fresh ideas into the company, and I welcomed the new talent. But as time passed, I realized that this wasn't about innovation, it was about replacement. Ava's new hire wasn't there to complement my skills. She was there to edge me out. I had spent decades honing my craft, creating designs that were both timeless and innovative, But now I found myself pushed to the margins, while someone who didn't even understand the company's roots was given a seat at the table. I felt the sting of it every time I walked into the office and saw the new designer sitting at my desk, working on projects that should have been mine. But it wasn't just the hire itself, it was the way it was handled, or rather, the way it wasn't handled. No one consulted me, no one asked for my opinion. The decision had been made without me, and the message was clear: I was no longer needed. Then came the wallpaper line, the one I had created from the ground up. It had been my signature design, something I was proud of, something that had defined Harlow Interiors in the early years. But when I discovered that it had been rebranded, given a new name, and launched as a separate collection without any acknowledgement of my work, I felt the ground beneath me shift. I remember standing in the showroom one afternoon, staring at the new line. The wallpaper was the same, but it had been stripped of the essence I had poured into it. The colors, the patterns, they were all mine, but they were now being sold as if they had come from someone else. It wasn't just the betrayal of seeing my creations erased. It was the message it sent. They didn't care about my legacy. They didn't care about the years of hard work I had invested in building something that could stand the test of time. At first, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I kept quiet, told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But as the days wore on, I felt the weight of it all. The wallpaper, the new designer, the subtle ways I was being pushed aside, all of it pointed to one inevitable truth. They were preparing to phase me out, to make me invisible in the very company I had created. It wasn't just the business anymore, it was the family. Liam, my son, had stopped looking at me the way he once had. He no longer saw me as his partner, or even his mother. I had become a placeholder, a token someone whose past contributions were being erased to make room for Ava's vision of the future. And then came the wedding. The day that should have been a celebration of Liam's new chapter and my place in it became the moment I realized just how far gone things had truly become. I had hoped that the wedding would be a turning point, that perhaps it would remind Liam of the bond we shared, of the sacrifices I had made for him. But instead, it was the final proof that the erosion of my role wasn't accidental, it was deliberate. The signs were all there written, in the way Liam introduced me, in the way Ava treated me, and in the way they both ignored the legacy I had built. I stood in that garden watching the reception unfold, and I knew then that there was no going back. They had chosen their path, and I had to choose mine. It wasn't just about the business anymore, it was about my dignity, my legacy, and my right to be seen not just as a founder, but as the woman who had given everything for this family. I wasn't going to stand by and let them erase me, not anymore. The decision to step away from the wedding reception was a turning point, a moment when I realized that I couldn't allow myself to be treated as an afterthought in my own family, in my own business. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of my love for Liam, always putting his needs, his future, and his success before my own. But now I knew that I had to put myself first. It was time to take action to reclaim control over my life and my legacy. I sat quietly in my car for a while after leaving the garden, the cool night air offering little comfort. My mind raced with the possibilities, the steps I would need to take. I could no longer afford to ignore the years of neglect, the gradual dismantling of my role in the company and in Liam's life. I had spent decades building Harlow Interiors, and it was time for me to protect what I had worked so hard to create. I knew the first step had to be legal. I had spent my entire adult life crafting an empire, but that empire was built on shaky ground if Liam and Ava could simply erase me with a few subtle moves. The family trust was supposed to protect the future, to ensure that the work I had put into the business would continue long after I was gone. But it wasn't enough to be part of that trust anymore, not if Liam was going to continue acting as though I was a mere asset. So I began the quiet process of removing Liam from the trust. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I knew it was time to redirect the family's wealth, not to Liam's future, but to something more meaningful. The trust, instead of securing Liam's dominance over Harlow Interiors, was going to be used to support causes that aligned with my values. Specifically, I chose to redirect the funds toward philanthropic initiatives that supported women in design. I knew that women like me, women who had fought to be heard in an industry dominated by men, needed resources, support, and visibility. It wasn't just about money either. It was about legacy, about showing that I was not just going to leave behind wealth for Liam to squander or to use to erase my contributions. No, I was going to leave a mark that mattered, a legacy of empowerment, a legacy that would help women, not just in design, but in business and beyond. I contacted Victor, my trusted lawyer, who had helped me navigate the intricate legal world of trusts and estates. I didn't need to explain myself to him. He understood what I wanted to do and why. Victor, I said, my voice steady, I need to amend the family trust. I want Liam removed from any future control over Harlow Interiors, redirect the business funds to support initiatives for women in design education and entrepreneurship. There was a brief silence on the other end, and then he simply replied, "Understood, Maggie. I'll make it happen." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weight of the years of sacrifice, the years of putting Liam's needs before my own, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. I was taking control again, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like the woman I had once been, strong, determined, and capable of making the hard decisions. But taking control meant more than just money and trust. It was also about reclaiming the pieces of my past, the tangible reminders of who I was and where I had come from. As I thought about the wedding, I realized that Ava had taken more than just my place in Liam's life. She had taken things that belonged to me, family heirlooms that had been passed down through generations, items that represented my legacy, my history. One of the most precious items was my grandmother's ring, a sapphire that had been worn by 3 generations of Sinclair women, passed down from mother to daughter, a symbol of strength, perseverance, and lineage. It was a piece of my soul, a part of me that I couldn't allow to be taken. The comb that had belonged to my mother, ivory studded with pearls, had been worn at every major event in our family's history. It was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of my heritage, something that tied me to the women who came before me. Ava had taken them both for the wedding, acting as though she had every right to do so. She had called it something borrowed, as though these items were just trinkets, just accessories for her big day. But they weren't hers to take. They were mine, my mother's, my grandmother's, and mine. And I wasn't about to let her walk away with them thinking she had earned them simply by being in the right place at the right time. I called Elaine, my loyal assistant who had worked with me for years, supporting me through thick and thin. She knew the value of these items, knew what they meant to me. "Elaine," I said quietly, "I need you to go to the bridal suite and collect what's mine, the ring and the comb." There was no hesitation in her voice when she responded, "Understood, Maggie. I'll take care of it." Later that day, as I sat in my office, I felt a sense of power return to me, a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years. The heirlooms were safely back in my possession, and with them my history, my legacy. Ava might have thought she could take them, but she had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else erase me or what I had worked so hard to create. It was no longer about being in the background, about being a footnote in Liam's life and in Harlow Interiors. I was reclaiming my power, my history, and my future. The days following my decision to take back control felt like I had entered a different world, one where I could breathe again. It wasn't about the anger anymore, though there had been plenty of that. It wasn't about revenge either. No, it was something far deeper, something more measured, more deliberate. I was reclaiming my legacy not by making a scene, but by taking subtle, quiet steps that would shift the very foundation of everything Liam and Ava thought they could control. The family business, Harlow Interiors, had always been my pride and joy. It wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of who I was. I had built it from the ground up, creating not just beautiful designs, but a reputation, one that carried weight in the industry. And now, after years of feeling sidelined and disregarded, I knew it was time to take a step back, to divest, and to remove myself from the equation entirely. I wasn't going to be the silent partner anymore. I wasn't going to be the backdrop to Liam and Ava's version of their future. The first step in that process was quiet, almost imperceptible to anyone else. I began to sell off some of the assets that had always been tied to Harlow Interiors' real estate licensing deals and a few dormant projects that I had kept in the background. To the outside world, it would seem like a normal business decision, a natural part of streamlining operations. But to me, it was reclaiming my independence, severing ties with something that had once been my everything. Selling off these assets wasn't a rash decision. It wasn't about leaving the business in disarray. It was about taking back control of the resources I had built and redirecting them towards something that mattered. Harlow Interiors would continue, but it would no longer carry the weight of my name and my legacy. That was now in my hands, and I would determine where it went. But the most impactful move was yet to come. The wedding-related funds, those funds that Liam and Ava had so confidently assumed would flow freely for their extravagant celebration, were the next thing to be frozen. The moment I had discovered the transactions that had been made without my approval, the moment I had realized that they were treating me like a bank and nothing more, I knew I had to stop the money from flowing. I couldn't let them continue with their plan, not when they had so clearly disregarded me. I called Victor again, my trusted lawyer. He was the only one who understood what this meant, not just for the business, but for me, for my future. "Victor," I said, my voice calm, even as my insides churned, "I need you to freeze all wedding-related funds, prevent any transfers, especially the ones that were set to go through automatically. Make sure nothing moves without my say." There was no hesitation in his voice. "Understood, Maggie. It'll be done." The action was swift, and before long the ripple effect began to spread. Without those funds, the grand plans Liam and Ava had for their luxurious wedding began to fall apart. The vendors, the caterers, and the event planners who had been counting on the promised funds suddenly found themselves in limbo. Invitations to the most extravagant wedding gifts were retracted, and the wedding that had once seemed so carefully orchestrated began to show cracks, all because the financial foundation they thought was secure had been yanked out from under them. What's remarkable about these subtle moves is how they were felt in the most unexpected places. Guests at the wedding began whispering their curiosity, piqued by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The murmurs of confusion and unease spread among them, though they didn't yet know the source. Some noticed that the champagne wasn't flowing as freely as it should have, while others began to question why certain high-end suppliers hadn't shown up. Even those who had been oblivious to the tension began to notice that things weren't as they seemed. Liam and Ava had worked so hard to present a polished image, one that reflected their wealth and status. But now, without the funds they had assumed were at their disposal, the cracks were beginning to show. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about the control they thought they had control that was now slipping away. As I watched from a distance, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because I had caused them harm, but because I had finally stopped being complicit in my own erasure. I was no longer a silent participant in their plans. For the first time in a long while, I felt as though I was on the right side of things, even if it wasn't the easy path. The ripple effect continued, and as each day passed, the family dynamics shifted in ways no one could have predicted. Liam, so used to being in control, began to feel the strain. Ava, with her polished exterior and perfect smile, started to unravel as she realized her grand vision for the future wasn't going to be as easy to implement as she had thought. They didn't know it yet, but their carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, not because of any loud confrontation, but because I had made a few calculated moves that had shifted the power dynamic in ways they hadn't anticipated. I didn't need to shout, to make a scene, or to demand recognition. I had learned over the years that the quietest moves often had the most lasting impact. And as I sat back and watched their world start to fall apart, I knew I had made the right choice. As the days wore on, the reality of what I had done began to settle within me. I had quietly redirected the flow of money-severed ties with the business I had worked so hard to build, and reclaimed my power in ways that would forever change the course of my life. But there was one final thing left for me to do, something that would define not just my future, but my legacy. The word legacy had always held a powerful weight for me. For years, I had believed that my legacy was tied to Harlow Interiors, the company I had built from nothing. I had sacrificed so much for it, from my time to my personal life. But now I could see things clearly. Legacy wasn't about wealth. It wasn't about titles or fancy business deals or maintaining a family business for the sake of tradition. It wasn't about my name being etched into a plaque in a boardroom. No, legacy was something far deeper, something more personal, something that couldn't be measured in dollars or degrees. I had always known that the core of my work was built on truth, love, and integrity. It wasn't the awards or the clients that defined me. It was my dedication to doing the right thing, my ability to stay true to myself even when the world around me was changing. My true legacy would be the people I had helped, the lives I had touched, and the values I had passed on, not just to my son, but to everyone who had crossed my path. I thought about the women I had mentored over the years, the young designers who had come to me for advice, for guidance, for the space to grow. I thought about how little had been done to support them in the industry, how few resources there were for women who wanted to break into the world of design, but didn't have the same advantages that men did. And I thought about how, for too long, I had allowed myself to be swallowed up by the pursuit of success and recognition. It was time to change that. It was time to leave behind something far more meaningful than a business empire. I sat down and began revising my will, carefully redirecting the estate's resources to something that would outlast any company or business venture. The money that had once been set aside for expanding Harlow Interiors would now fund women's initiative scholarships for design students from underrepresented backgrounds and grants for women entrepreneurs who needed support to launch their own businesses. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This was my true legacy. Helping the next generation of women in design wasn't just a passion, it was my responsibility. I wasn't just leaving behind wealth, I was leaving behind the tools for others to build something meaningful, to create their own legacies. Once I had finalized the revisions, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was how I wanted to be remembered, not for the empire I had built, but for the impact I had on others, especially women who had been overlooked and marginalized. It wasn't just about helping them succeed. It was about giving them the opportunity to succeed on their own terms, just as I had done. The final piece of the puzzle was the announcement. I knew that despite everything that had happened, I needed to step away from Harlow Interiors publicly. I could no longer hide in the shadows of the business I had once called my own. I needed to let the world know that this decision was mine, and that I was choosing a new path, one that was true to the person I had always been at my core. So I drafted a press statement, carefully choosing my words. I wasn't interested in making a spectacle out of my departure. I didn't need to explain myself in detail or engage in any drama. I simply needed to speak the truth. The statement was clear, direct, and to the point. After decades of building Harlow Interiors, I am officially stepping down from my role in the company. I have chosen to redirect my resources into initiatives that support women in design, education, and entrepreneurship. Legacy is not about the empire you build, nor is it about money or titles. It is about the people who protect your truth, who remember your story, and who carry it forward when you're no longer there. My legacy will be one of truth, love, and integrity, and I will continue to support those who carry these values into the future. I released the statement to the press, and I knew the ripple effects would start immediately. The media would undoubtedly make a fuss about my departure, speculating about the reasons behind it. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had made the decision for myself, and I was finally stepping into my truth. As I sat back, reflecting on the years that had brought me to this point, I realized that I had finally let go of the fear that had held me back for so long. I no longer cared about the approval of those who had diminished me. I no longer cared about the facade of success. What mattered now was the legacy I would leave behind, not just in business, but in the lives of the women I would help, the stories I would inspire, and the change I would create. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. In the weeks that followed my public announcement, I made it clear to myself that stepping away from Harlow Interiors wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something far more meaningful. While the world, including Liam and Ava, expected me to make a grand exit, to make a spectacle, I understood that true power lies in subtlety. I didn't need a dramatic gesture, and I certainly didn't need anyone's approval. What I needed was control, and I would take it quietly, with precision. The first thing I did was to shift my focus onto my personal finances. I had spent years allowing the family business to consume me, but now the business no longer had the same hold over me. I made sure to carefully review every asset I owned, from the investments tied to Harlow Interiors to the properties and accounts that had once been so intricately linked to the company's operations. I took the necessary legal steps to ensure that none of my personal wealth would be tied up in the future of the business. Harlow Interiors was no longer a priority in my life, and it was time to untangle myself from it completely. Victor, ever the trusted advisor, assisted me in setting up a new financial structure, one that was entirely separate from Harlow Interiors. Together, we created a financial framework that would support my new philanthropic ventures initiatives, that would empower women in design education and entrepreneurship. It was important for me to redirect my resources into something more purposeful, something that would have a long-lasting impact. My wealth would no longer flow toward a company that had discarded me. Instead, it would support causes that aligned with the values I had fought for all my life: integrity, empowerment, and self-determination. As I shifted my financial priorities, I also took the time to audit the family trust. It was an action that needed to be done, even though I had already removed Liam from the trust. I wanted to ensure that no corners were cut, no loopholes were left open, and that every part of my estate, my wealth, was protected. The trust was a reflection of my life's work, and I wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Liam and Ava, gain access to it when they had shown such blatant disregard for me. I knew what I was doing. There was no room for missteps. As I reviewed every line, every clause in the trust, I made changes where necessary. I tightened the security of my assets, ensuring that they would be used for the causes I had already outlined, supporting women who, like me, had spent their lives building something only to be overlooked or dismissed. I would leave behind something that was truly mine, a legacy that reflected my values, my strength, and the vision I had for the future. None of these moves were grand gestures. There were no dramatic confrontations or public declarations. I didn't need to shout from the rooftops. Instead, I worked in silence in the background, making sure my decisions were carefully executed and that everything was in place. It wasn't about showing Liam or Ava that I was in control. It was about ensuring that when all was said and done, I would be in control of my own future. The beauty of these strategic moves lay in their quiet impact. I didn't need to fight or argue. The decisions spoke for themselves. As the weeks passed, I noticed subtle shifts in the family dynamics. Liam and Ava, who had once assumed they would inherit the future I had built, were left scrambling. Without the resources they had been expecting, their plans began to unravel. Harlow Interiors, once the center of their ambitions, now stood as an empty vessel, without the power or resources it had once commanded. The absence of my financial backing wasn't something they could ignore. It wasn't something they could easily fix with another big deal or quick business maneuver. It was a shift that would take time to fully recognize, but the seed had been planted. Without me, without my financial influence, Harlow Interiors was no longer the shining empire it had once been. It was slowly becoming clear to Liam and Ava that the future they had envisioned was slipping through their fingers. And as I continued to take these quiet steps, I could feel a sense of satisfaction building inside me, not because I had done something to harm them, but because I had finally done something for myself. For once, I was the one making the decisions. I was the one taking control of my own destiny. There were no fireworks, no dramatic exits, just quiet, deliberate action. I had learned over the years that true power wasn't about loud gestures or flashy moves. It was about precision, about making the right choices at the right time, and about understanding that you don't have to fight the world to shape your future. You simply have to take the reins, make your moves, and let the results speak for themselves. As the weeks passed and the family's world began to shift beneath them, I remained steady. I had defended my legacy. I had protected what was mine. And most importantly, I had ensured that my future one built on my values, my truth, and my integrity was secure. The days that followed my quiet reclamation of control were filled with a certain stillness, a calm that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace of resolution, not yet, but it was the peace of clarity of knowing I had taken the necessary steps to protect what I had worked so hard to build, and more importantly, what I still had left. The ripples from my decisions had started to reach Liam and Ava, though they didn't yet fully understand the depth of what had happened. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I stared at the screen for a moment before picking it up. There was a sense of knowing deep in my gut that this was coming. Mom Liam's voice came through the line, sounding strained, unfamiliar, in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I couldn't respond. The words I had been holding on to for so long, the words that had been buried beneath years of love, sacrifice, and silent disappointment came rushing to the surface. I wanted to be angry, to remind him of everything he had done, of every little betrayal, every slight. But I held it back. I didn't need to unleash that anger anymore. It was already out of my hands. "Liam," I said, my voice calm but firm. "What is it?" He paused before speaking again, his voice softer now. I know I've made mistakes, Mom. I've hurt you. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. I'm sorry." The words were difficult for him to say. I could hear it in his voice, an earnestness perhaps, but also a sense of panic, as if he were desperately trying to mend something that could never be fixed. I could hear him struggling with the weight of everything he had done, the choices he had made, without considering the impact on me, his mother, the woman who had given everything to build the life he now had. "I never wanted to hurt you," he continued. "It's just, with Ava and everything else, I thought I had to push forward, that I needed to be in control. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I should have seen what I was doing." His apology hung in the air, and I felt the familiar pang of sadness that I had learned to bury. The Liam I had raised, the son who once saw me as his world, was gone, replaced by someone who had allowed himself to be swept away by ambition, by Ava's influence, by the allure of success. And while I could feel a part of me wanting to reach out and forgive him, something inside me resisted. I had spent so many years forgiving. I had given him everything, my time, my attention, my love, and in return, I had been erased, dismissed, replaced. I had let it happen because I had believed that love meant sacrificing my own needs, my own worth. But now I realized that true love was not about self-erasure. It was about standing firm in who you are, in what you deserve. And the apology Liam was offering, as heartfelt as it seemed, came too late. "Liam," I said, my voice steady, "I appreciate that you're sorry, but you need to understand something. I've spent years standing by, letting you take the lead in your life, while I faded into the background. I thought it was my role to be there for you no matter what, even when I was being dismissed. But this isn't just about an apology. The damage is done." I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle between us. I could almost hear him taking a breath, on the other end of the line, preparing for what was coming next. You let Ava erase me from your life. You allowed her to take my place, to rebrand me as just another tool for your success. You let her push me aside without even a second thought. That's something I can't forget and something I can't undo. I let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. I've spent years trying to protect you, trying to be the mother you needed even when you didn't know how to appreciate it. But that's over now. The relationship we had, it's changed, and I don't think it can go back to what it was. I heard him swallow hard, his voice cracking slightly as he responded, Mom, I didn't mean for it to be like this. I thought I was doing what was best. I never meant to push you away. I could hear the regret in his voice, and I knew that he truly felt the weight of his actions. But as much as I wanted to believe in the sincerity of his apology, I knew it wasn't enough. Not this time. Not after everything that had happened. No, Liam, I said, my voice softening but firm. It's not just about what you meant. It's about what's been done, and I've come to realize that I can't keep sacrificing myself for a relationship that doesn't honor me. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know that I can no longer be the person you lean on, the person who sacrifices her own needs for your sake. I have to protect myself now. There was another long pause, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But instead he spoke again, his voice smaller now, almost resigned. I understand. I really do. I wish I had seen it sooner. I'm sorry, Mom. And with that, the conversation ended. The closure I had been hoping for, the one I thought might bring some sense of peace, didn't come. But it wasn't about that anymore. It wasn't about fixing things with Liam. It was about understanding that the relationship we once had could never be the same. I had done everything I could. I had loved him with all my heart, but now it was time to let go. Our lives, our paths had diverged in ways that could never be reconciled, and as painful as it was to accept, I knew that the mother I had been to him, the woman who had given him everything, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had finally learned to stand up for herself, to protect her truth, and to walk away when the cost of staying was too great. The relationship had changed irreparably, and I had finally accepted that. The days after the final conversation with Liam passed in a quiet, almost surreal haze. I had expected some sort of emotional release, perhaps a sense of finality or closure, but instead I felt a deep, unfamiliar calm. I wasn't angry, nor did I feel sorrowful. I simply felt free. Free from the suffocating weight of expectations, free from the manipulations of a family who had taken so much without ever truly acknowledging me. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe without the pressure of being a mother, a businesswoman, a caretaker, and a martyr all at once. I was simply Clara. As the media caught wind of my departure from Harlow Interiors, the reports began to trickle in. The headlines, some sympathetic, others critical, all mentioned my decision to step away, to sever my ties to the business that had been my life for decades. The press, ever hungry for a story, eagerly speculated about the reasons behind my exit. Some thought it was a result of the growing tension between Liam and me. Others believed it was due to a clash between my values and Ava's ambitions for the future of the business. But none of them truly understood the truth. None of them understood that this decision wasn't about revenge, nor was it about some personal vendetta. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, and my legacy. And though the media was buzzing with questions, none of them could see the deeper shift that was taking place, not just in my life, but in Liam and Ava's carefully constructed world. As I had suspected, the impact of my departure was far-reaching. Harlow Interiors, once a shining example of business success, began to falter. The empire they had so carefully built on the back of my hard work began to crumble. Contracts that had once been guaranteed were now uncertain. Investors who had once trusted the brand were now questioning its future. Ava, ever the strategist, attempted to maintain control, But without the financial backing and the influence I had provided, her efforts were met with increasing resistance. The walls they had built brick by brick began to show cracks that they couldn't hide. It wasn't just the business that was unraveling. The whispers of the business world grew louder. My departure, a quiet and calculated act, had sent shockwaves through their carefully crafted image. The story of the powerful, successful family with their pristine business model was beginning to shift. People started to ask questions. Why had I left? What had really happened behind closed doors? The answers were never as simple as the media wanted them to be, and that uncertainty gnawed at them. But through all of this, I remained resolute. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't need to make another statement or publicly defend my decisions. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. For once in my life, I wasn't hiding behind a facade. I wasn't trying to please anyone or justify my actions. The truth was clear. I had made a choice, and that choice was mine to own. And in the aftermath of it all, I found peace. It wasn't a peace that came easily, nor one that I had expected. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from resolving a conflict or winning a battle. It was the peace that comes from finally being free of the weight of others' expectations. I no longer had to carry the burden of trying to fit into a family, a business, or a narrative that wasn't mine to begin with. I was finally free to live life on my terms, and for the first time in years, I felt truly respected, not for what I could give, not for what I could offer, but simply for who I was. The freedom was intoxicating. No longer would I be defined by my relationship to Liam or to the legacy of Harlow Interiors. I was Clara Harlow, a woman who had built something from nothing, who had loved deeply, and who had learned the hard way that true power lies not in clinging to the past, but in letting go of what no longer serves you. But even in this newfound peace, I knew that my journey was far from over. I wasn't simply going to disappear into the quiet of my retreat, waiting for time to pass. No, I had something bigger in mind. I had already made the decision to redirect my wealth, my influence, and my resources into something that truly mattered. My legacy was no longer tied to a business empire. It was now tied to something greater, to the women who had come before me, to the women who had inspired me, and to the women who would come after. With my finances in order, I continued to assert control over my legacy, using my wealth and influence to support women in design, education, and entrepreneurship. I knew the impact I could make, how my resources could help young women who had been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed, just as I had been. I established scholarships, funded mentorship programs, and began investing in women-led businesses that were changing the landscape of design. My wealth was no longer a tool to prop up a family business that had failed to value me. It was now a means to help others build something that would stand on its own. I made it clear, both to the world and to myself, that my focus was no longer on the past. It was on the future of design, the future of women, and the future of a legacy that would live on not in buildings or businesses, but in the lives of those who would carry it forward with love, integrity, and purpose. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace with the path I had chosen. The silence, the subtle defiance, and the quiet strength, it all came together. My true legacy had nothing to do with wealth or title. It had everything to do with creating space for others to shine. As the days turned into weeks, and the echoes of my decisions settled into the fabric of my life, I realized that I had come full circle. The journey I had been on, from a young, ambitious designer to a mother who had built an empire, had been long filled with both triumph and sacrifice. But in the end, it wasn't the empire I had built that defined me. It was the way I chose to step away from it, the quiet strength I had found in reclaiming my identity. My final act of reclaiming my legacy wasn't marked by grand speeches or public declarations. It was a quiet yet powerful statement about who I had become and who I was choosing to be. It wasn't about proving anything to Liam or to Ava or to anyone else. It was about understanding that legacy isn't something to be manipulated or controlled by others. It is something that must be rooted in truth and personal integrity. For so long, I had let others dictate my value. I had allowed my identity to be defined by my relationship to Harlow Interiors, by my role as a mother, and by the expectations that came with it. But I had finally realized that my true legacy wasn't bound to a business or a title. It was bound to the choices I made every day, the way I treated myself, and the impact I had on the world around me. Leaving Harlow Interiors wasn't just about walking away from a business. It was about shedding the weight of a life I had outgrown, one that had become increasingly suffocating. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward a life that was truly mine. A life where I could make a difference, where my legacy would no longer be about the family ties or the name, but about the work I chose to do, the people I chose to help, and the truth I chose to live by. And as I moved forward, I did so with peace in my heart, knowing that my legacy would be defined not by what I left behind, but by what I chose to create in the future. My story was far from over. It was just beginning. The end of one era had simply paved the way for the beginning of another. This time it was a legacy built on integrity, love, and a commitment to living on my own terms. And that in itself was the greatest gift I could give to myself and to the world. In today's world, it's easy to get caught up in the idea that our worth is tied to what we do, what we have, or the roles we play in others' lives. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that our true legacy is not defined by titles or businesses, but by the integrity with which we live our lives. It's about the choices we make and how we honor ourselves along the way. Too often, we let others dictate our path, placing expectations on us that can weigh us down and leave us feeling unseen. Clara chose to reclaim her power not through grand gestures or public confrontations, but through quiet, deliberate action. She showed us that true strength lies in standing firm in our values, letting go of what no longer serves us, and embracing the future on our own terms. In a world that constantly demands more from us, it's crucial to recognize the importance of self-respect and authenticity. So I encourage you to reflect on your own life. Are you living in alignment with your values? Are you allowing others to define your worth, or are you boldly stepping into your own legacy? It's never too late to make a change, to take back control of your narrative. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey. If Clara's story resonates with you, leave a comment below, share your own experiences, and what it means to you to take back your power. And if this message speaks to you, be sure to check out more videos that dive deeper into how we can live with authenticity and purpose. You won't want to miss it.